stepping back with hands raised. Officers cuffed Darren and Louise, paramedics rushed to Melissa, and questions exploded into the humid air. "Are you law enforcement?" one officer asked Ethan. "No, sir," he replied. "Navy." The word carried weight. At the station later, statements were given. Melissa learned his name. Ethan tried to slip away before gratitude could find him, but it did. She caught up to him outside beneath a flickering street lamp, throat bandaged, voice shaky. "You saved my life," she said. Ethan shook his head. They made a bad decision. But the story didn't end in that alley, because Darren Pike had a cousin, Marcus Pike, who didn't take humiliation lightly. Marcus wasn't a petty thief. He ran a small but ruthless crew moving narcotics through the harbor. When he saw Darren in the hospital with a dislocated shoulder and a fractured pride, when he heard about the military guy who'd embarrassed him in front of squad cars and flashing lights, something darker than anger settled in his chest. He began asking questions. It wasn't hard to learn Ethan's name. Court records and police chatter travel fast in tight circles. Within days, Marcus knew Ethan was on leave, knew roughly where he was staying, a modest townhouse owned by an old friend from his SEAL team, and decided to send a message. Meanwhile, Ethan tried to return to normal life. He visited his mother in Annapolis, fixed a loose railing on her porch, pretended he didn't scan rooftops while drinking lemonade. But at night, he replayed the alley. Not the fight, the hesitation. Luis's blade had pressed deep enough to draw blood. Ethan knew how close it had been. He also knew violence rarely ended cleanly. 3 nights later, as thunder rolled over the Chesapeake Bay, a black SUV idled 2 houses down from Ethan's temporary home. Inside sat Marcus and 2 associates, watching lights flicker off inside the townhouse. "We just scare him," one associate muttered. Marcus shook his head slowly. "No, we show him." They moved at 2:13 a.m., masked, armed, silent. But they underestimated the same thing Darren had. Ethan didn't sleep like civilians. The faint crunch of gravel outside snapped him awake. He was upright before his brain fully processed why. Years of training stitched awareness into his nerves. He slid from bed, retrieved the legally owned handgun from his nightstand safe, and moved toward the window without turning on lights. 3 shadows approached the door. Ethan exhaled once, steadying. They breached with a kick. Wood splintered. "Where you at, hero?" a voice sneered. Ethan didn't answer. He moved upstairs instead of down, drawing them in, forcing them to funnel through narrow space. The first masked man rounded the staircase corner too aggressively. Ethan grabbed his arm, twisted, and slammed him into the wall, weapon skidding across hardwood. A second rushed. Ethan fired one controlled shot into the ceiling, not to hit, but to disorient. In the chaos, he drove the second man backward, disarming him with brutal efficiency. Marcus remained near the door, momentarily frozen by the realization that this was not intimidation. It was suicide. "You don't want this," Ethan called out from the shadows. "Leave." Marcus fired blindly toward the stairs. Drywall exploded. Ethan descended 2 steps at a time, closing distance before Marcus could aim again. A swift kick knocked the gun aside. A punch shattered Marcus's mask. They grappled, crashing into the broken doorway, rain spraying across the threshold. Marcus was bigger than Darren, stronger, but undisciplined. Ethan fought like a machine, precise strikes, controlled breathing, no wasted motion. Within seconds, Marcus was pinned against the SUV hood, wrist twisted, face pressed to cold metal. Police sirens approached again. Neighbors had called this time at the first gunshot. "You came to my home," Ethan said low, inches from Marcus's ear. "Wrong move." When officers arrived, they found 3 men subdued and 1 veteran standing in the rain, weapon on the ground, hands raised. News spread faster this time. Local stations ran headlines. "Navy SEAL foils home invasion, linked to harbor crime ring." Melissa saw the report and felt a chill realizing the violence hadn't ended in the alley. She visited Ethan the next day, guilt in her eyes. "This is because of me," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "It's because some people think fear makes them powerful." Marcus and his crew faced serious charges: armed home invasion, illegal weapons, outstanding warrants uncovered during investigation. The harbor narcotics operation unraveled under federal scrutiny, triggered by the incident. What began as a random mugging attempt exposed a larger criminal network. Darren's easy score had detonated his cousin's empire. Months later, in a packed courtroom, Marcus glared at Ethan across polished wood floors, shackled, defeated not just physically but strategically. The judge handed down a lengthy sentence. Melissa attended too, not as a victim this time, but as a witness to consequence. Outside the courthouse, she turned to Ethan. You changed everything. Ethan looked at the American flag rippling above the entrance, sunlight catching its edges. No, he said softly. They did, the second they chose that alley. He returned to duty shortly after, deploying again to places few Americans would ever see. But in Baltimore, people remembered the night predators learned the meaning of a wrong move. And somewhere in a prison cell, Marcus Pike replayed the moment his blade touched someone he thought was defenseless, realizing too late that danger doesn't always look dangerous. And sometimes the quiet man at the cafe is the storm you never saw coming. What would you do if the most dangerous mistake of your life happened in less than 3 seconds, and you didn't even realize you just made it? Before we begin, if you believe courage still matters, if you believe evil should never get the last word, hit subscribe and stay with this channel, because tonight's story isn't just entertainment. It's a reminder that heroes don't always wear uniforms in public, but they're always watching. It was supposed to be an ordinary Friday night in downtown Baltimore, the kind of humid East Coast evening where the harbor lights shimmer against dark water and office workers drift into restaurants with loosened ties and tired smiles. Melissa Carter stepped out of her law firm building at 8:47 p.m., clutching her leather briefcase and scrolling through a message from her sister about Sunday dinner, unaware that across the street 2 men had already decided she would not make it home on schedule. They weren't professionals, at least not in the discipline sense, but they were predators of opportunity, and opportunity had just walked through revolving glass doors and heels in confidence. The taller one, Darren Pike, had a history of armed robbery and short tempers. The other, Luis Moreno, followed him like a shadow, thinner, jittery. With a switchblade he flicked open and closed like punctuation to his nerves. They had watched Melissa for 3 nights, assuming she was wealthy, alone, and vulnerable. What they didn't see, what they couldn't possibly have guessed, was that 40 feet behind her, seated at an outdoor table with a half-finished black coffee and the posture of someone perpetually aware of exits, sat Chief Petty Officer Ethan Cross, United States Navy SEAL, home on temporary leave after his 3rd deployment in 8 years. Ethan wasn't in uniform. He wore jeans, boots, and a plain gray Henley shirt, sleeves pulled tight against forearms that carried quiet strength. He wasn't scanning for trouble because he wanted to. He was scanning because he didn't know how to stop. War had rewired him. Crowds meant variables. Darkness meant angles. Laughter meant distraction. When Darren and Louise crossed the street too quickly, Ethan noticed. When they flanked Melissa near the narrow alley beside a closed jewelry store, Ethan stood. Melissa sensed them a split second too late. Darren's arm locked around her shoulders while Louise stepped in front, blade flashing under the streetlight, pressing cold steel against the soft skin of her throat. "Don't scream!" Darren hissed, breath sour with adrenaline. The world narrowed to the pressure of metal and the thunder in Melissa's ears. Traffic moved 30 yards away, oblivious. A couple exiting a nearby bar laughed, not looking down the alley. Darren demanded her purse, her phone, her jewelry. Louise pushed the blade closer, just enough to draw a thin, trembling line of red. And that's when Ethan moved. Not fast like in the movies, not reckless, but deliberate, measured, like a chess piece sliding into its winning square. He didn't shout. He didn't posture. He walked into the mouth of the alley with hands visible and voice calm. "Hey," he said evenly, eyes locked on Darren first, then Louise, cataloging stance, grip, distance, fear. "Let her go." Darren tightened his hold. "Back off, man. This ain't your business." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "You're right. It's not. But you're making a mistake." Louise laughed nervously. "You think you're tough? We'll cut her." Ethan's gaze flicked to the blade. Cheap steel. Folding mechanism. Weak wrist control. He'd disarmed men with better weapons in darker places. "You won't," Ethan said quietly. And something in his tone, absolute certainty, not bravado, made Louise hesitate for half a heartbeat. Darren felt that hesitation and panicked. "Shut up and give us your wallet too," he barked, trying to regain dominance. Ethan slowly reached toward his back pocket, drawing their attention away from Melissa's eyes, which were now locked onto him with desperate confusion. He wasn't built like a superhero. He looked like any other veteran grabbing dinner alone, but his posture had changed, weight balanced, breathing steady, every muscle primed. "Okay," he murmured, stepping closer as if complying. Darren shifted to keep Ethan in view, loosening his chokehold by inches. That was the first wrong move. In less than a second, Ethan lunged. not at Darren, but at Luis's wrist. His left hand clamped down with crushing precision, while his right drove into Luis's elbow joint, hyperextending it with a sickening pop. The blade clattered to the pavement. Before Darren could react, Ethan pivoted, shoulders slamming into Darren's chest while sweeping his leg. Melissa dropped as she'd been trained to do years earlier in a college self-defense class, ironically saving herself from the full force of Darren's collapsing body. Ethan followed through, knee pinning Darren's arm while twisting Luis's injured wrist behind his back. The alley echoed with curses and pain. It was over in 4 seconds. 4 seconds that changed who was in danger. Darren, once predator, now lay face down with his cheek grinding against concrete, Ethan's forearm cutting off circulation to his shoulder. Luis whimpered, clutching his useless arm. Melissa scrambled backward, hand at her bleeding throat, staring as the stranger who had seemed so calm transformed into something controlled and terrifying. "Stay down," Ethan commanded, voice no longer conversational, but edged with steel forged far from Baltimore. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had finally noticed the commotion. Darren tried to buck upward. Ethan applied pressure, and Darren screamed. "You picked the wrong night," Ethan said quietly, leaning closer so only Darren could hear. "And the wrong target." Police arrived within minutes, weapons drawn, ordering everyone to freeze. Ethan complied instantly, releasing pressure and stepping back with hands raised. "Officers,